Okay, so our basic topic for today is approach to anemia and approach to anemia in diagnosing hematological malignancies. Now, if you see exaggerated workup for anemia, there are lots of these tests which can be ordered for anemia, but it's very important that we order the test correctly and interpret and understand the blood test that we order. So there's lots that's available, and of course observation runs very sadly into waste if it is made very piecemeal. So it's very important to have the right approach, and the right approach is take a good history, examine the patient, then order the right test and interpret the test rightly. So the whole exercise today is maybe to reach a step beyond what we could always do. Now, the first thing that when we are looking at anemia, we should not be just looking at hemoglobin. Hemoglobin tells us that there is anemia, but there is beyond that. So let's see what a CBC report starts reflecting. So if we start looking at anemia based on the RBC indices, and we will divide based on the cell of the red blood cells as to whether it is normocytic, microcytic or macrocytic. So the normal RBCs measure 80 to 100 fluorons, and anything more than 100 is called a macrocytic anemia. Anything which is less than 80 is a microcytic anemia. Now, if I have to base my workup based on the MCV, as I said, we would divide it into microcytic, and the common causes that we start expecting are iron deficiency, anemia of chronic disease, thalassemias or other hemoglobinopathies, or sideroblastic anemia rarely. Then we go on to macrocytic anemia. Again, we see a lot of patients with megaloblastic anemia, which is secondary to B12 and folate deficiency. Then we have patients with alcoholic liver disease where there is macrocytosis. Then some hemoglobinopathies, some metabolic disorders, or they can be marrow disorders like myelodysplasia, and even in patients who have hemolysis, because of an increased retic response, we may have a macrocytosis. Now, when we come to a normocytic normochromic anemia, where this is the most common cause is anemia of chronic disease or chronic infection or inflammation. Even early iron deficiency, before the hemoglobins fall, the first thing that may happen is that when the hemoglobin falls, the first thing it may be that in the early iron deficiency, when suppose there's a blood loss, before they become microcytic, we may see early iron deficiency showing a normocytic normochromic picture. So that is also to be kept in mind. And then of course hemoglobinopathies and other marrow disorders and increased destruction in the form of hemolysis, there may be a normocytic normochromic anemia. So just the indices are not enough. What I want to highlight is that there should be more emphasis on ordering a peripheral blood smear, and that's because the expertise of the man or woman behind the microscope cannot be replaced as far as the CBC is concerned, because therein lie many missing links. Now you see autoagglutination here, which can actually make a spot diagnosis. We are seeing basophilic stippling, again a spot diagnosis of B12 deficiency, hypersegmented neutrophils, blasts, nucleated RBCs, target cells in thalassemia. Then you are seeing crenated RBCs and cystocytes when there is a thrombotic thrombocytopenic purpura or a microangiopathic hemolysis, and spherocytes in autoimmune hemolytic. So these are things which the Holter will not pick up. So a peripheral blood smear should be integrated into each case of anemia workup. So as I mentioned in my last slide also, basophilic stippling, we start thinking about lead poisoning, thalassemia and B12 deficiency. Havel-Jovel bodies are seen post-splenectomy. Spherocytes are seen in autoimmune hemolytic anemia and hereditary spherocytosis. Cystocytes are seen in TTP and DIC. Target cells are seen in hemoglobinopathy and liver disease. Teardrops start reflecting that there may be a myelothysis or a myelofibrosis in the marrow. Polychromasia in the peripheral smear is indicative of reticulocytosis, and hyperchromia is essentially indicative of iron deficiency or a thalassemic state. So now I am going to go by MCV less than 80. The most commonest cause is iron deficiency. This is associated with a high red cell distribution width because all the cells are at different stages. Red blood cells have a long lifespan of 120 days and different cells have been exposed to different grades of iron deficiency at different levels, which is only getting worse if it's untreated. So you get a very high RDW. Whereas in a thalassemia minor, which also will be microcytic hypochromic, you expect to see a normal RDW. But please mind you, we do see, particularly in women in our country who are in the menstruating age group, a patient who has iron deficiency along with thalassemia minor. So that complexity needs to be picked up based on the blood test. Now, of course, other rare causes of microcytic hypochromia are these. Now this is the typical way a microcytic hypochromic picture will look in an iron deficiency. You see these target cells, the pencil shaped cells, and you see a lot of variation in isopoikilocytosis. Some cells are big, some cells are small, and then you see that there is more than central 1/3 pallor which is normal for a RBC. There's more than 1/3 pallor. So that is what we call as hypochromia, and the size of the cells is generally small, that is microcytic. So microcytic hypochromic anemia with an isopoikilocytosis, which is reflected in the RBC indices in the form of high RDW, and you see a lot of pencil shaped cells. So that kind of gives you a pointer toward iron deficiency. Now we cannot obviously just see the MCV. So we should, as I said, we should not do piecemeal. We have a history and we look at all the indices and we integrate the peripheral smear and also do the iron studies. So if there's a case of anemia and then we look at the iron, TIBC and ferritin, and we look at the ferritin, if it is less, then it's a clear-cut case of iron deficiency. If the ferritin is between 15 and 20, we look at the total iron binding capacity. If the iron binding capacity is high, then you start giving a trial of iron, and if anemia gets corrected, that is an iron deficiency. If the iron TIBC is high and the anemia is not corrected, then you need to do a bone marrow to see what are the iron stores in the bone marrow. On the other hand, suppose if the TIBC is normal to low, I'm sorry these arrows are missing here. So if the TIBC is normal or low, we can straight, these are the situations where ferritin may be okay but the total iron binding capacity is low. These are patients who may have anemia of chronic disease, and like patients with chronic renal failure or so, where if suppose anemia is not responding to erythropoietin, we should go and do the bone marrow and see what are the iron stores. Now if the ferritin is more than 120, then the iron deficiency is clearly excluded. But we will now I'm sorry, I think I missed on some slides here. Now there are some things that we need to understand, that serum iron is very largely influenced by the iron content in the diet. So suppose somebody, or the tablets, so sometimes when patients are on oral iron preparations and we do serum iron profile, the iron may come falsely high. So that is something that needs to be kept in mind. And similarly, while ordering the test, we have to keep in mind that ferritin is an acute phase reactant. So sometimes in the presence of infection, inflammation, ferritin may be high, and that should not be concluded as that there is no iron deficiency. So we have to combine everything, integrate it together, look at this chart and sort of come to a conclusion on how best the patient needs a treatment. Now if the MCV is more than 100, this is a scenario where suppose it's between 100 and 110, we must look for other causes of macrocytosis, not saying that we should not think about a B12 cobalamin deficiency, but virtually if it is more than 110, it is invariably a folate and B12 deficiency. Now these are the other causes of MCV being more than 100. As I mentioned, sometimes certain drugs, like we have patients of myeloproliferative disorders on cytoreductive therapies like hydroxyurea, then patients of rheumatoid on methotrexate, or hematological malignancies on methotrexate, or chemotherapies. Some of these will definitely lead to a MCV which is high. Alcohol is again a toxin which will lead to a high MCV. So you can actually see a CBC and a macrocytosis and know if somebody is having a lot of alcohol. Then reticulocytosis, whenever you have high retic count, because reticulocytes are larger in size, you can get on the peripheral smear or on the MCV may come high because there's a lot of reticulocytes in the peripheral blood smear. Then of course, as I said, B12 folate deficiency, myelodysplastic syndrome, which becomes a differential in any elderly person who presents with a macrocytic anemia which is not responding to B12 or folate. Then of course, we have to keep in mind things like marrow infiltration secondary to a malignancy or fibrosis. The lesser common causes are aplasia, or they can be also because of autoimmune hemolytic anemia, which can present with MCV which is high. Now 25 to 96% of alcoholics will have macrocytosis. So MCV elevation is about 100 to 110. The anemia may or may not be there, or it's very mild. These are macrocytes, but they're not macroovalocytes. When you see macroovalocytes, that is virtually associated with B12 deficiency. Now, another hallmark of B12 deficiency is the hypersegmentation of the neutrophils. So if we see that, then we should think about B12, but other causes can be associated with without hypersegmentation. So what I mean by neutrophil hypersegmentation is that the neutrophils normally have less than 5 lobes. So if you see more than 5% of the neutrophils which have more than 5 lobes, or a single neutrophil which has more than 6 lobes, that becomes a neutrophilic hypersegmentation, and it's a very, very sensitive marker of B12 deficiency. And suppose you have folate stores which are normal, even then macrocytosis can be present. Now, what is megaloblastic hematopoiesis? Here there is a marrow failure because there is a disrupted DNA synthesis and ineffective hematopoiesis. So I get some of times these patients are referred to me because of hemolytic anemia, because they have mild jaundice and they may have anemia, and actually it's because these cells, megaloblasts, which are sort of, there is a DNA defect, they are destroyed within the bone marrow. So it's an ineffective erythropoiesis that's happening, and that leads to a mild unconjugated hyperbilirubinemia. Now, if we do a marrow, we see that there are giant myelocytes and giant erythroblasts. Sometimes they are even mistaken for leukemias. And there is a nuclear cytoplasmic disc synchrony in the marrow. As I said, macrovalocytes and neutrophilic hypersegmentation are the hallmarks. And the anemia may be there, and it may be associated with leukopenia and thrombocytopenia in certain cases. So you may have pancytopenia with high LDH levels and a retic which is low, and there might be mild unconjugated hyperbilirubinemia. So these are actually not patients with aplastic anemia, but they are patients with B12 deficiency, and they are easily corrected, and we do not subject everybody to a bone marrow also when it's straightforward. I mentioned about neutrophil hypersegmentation. It is the earliest and most sensitive and specific sign. So if a pathologist is reporting, please look at the report on the peripheral smear if this is present. This can persist for average of 2 weeks after institution of the specific therapy. It's only after 2 weeks that of B12 that has been given that you will stop seeing this finding. So it will persist. I already mentioned high LDH and oval macrocytes. So this is hypersegmented neutrophil. See, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lobes are there. So this is the way it typically looks. This is the way the slide will look. There are macrocytes, and there is, look at the oval shape of the macrovalocytes. They are not only big, they are oval in shape. Now, what are the tests that we do? We order for serum B12 and serum folate. We should understand what these mean and how to interpret them. Now, normal serum B12 actually excludes a significant tissue deficiency except in patients with transcobalamin deficiency. Now basically B12 in the blood is carried along with what we call as R binders. So these are transcobalamin 1, 2 and 3. Most of it, 80% is bound to transcobalamin 1. But the active form of B12 is what delivers to the tissue is transcobalamin 2. So now we have a specific test which I'll be mentioning in my next slide, what is called as a holo-TC, which is measuring the active B12. So sometimes if B12 can't predict, we can order this, which is available at least with SRL diagnostics, and it is of the same cost as B12, where we can measure what is going to be actively available in the body to the tissues. So that can predict if there's B12 deficiency. So patients who have increased transcobalamin level 1 may have increased B12 levels. Now this transcobalamin level 1 is increased in myeloproliferative disorders. So patients with CML and myeloproliferative disorders like myelofibrosis, they have increased transcobalamin 1 expression, and that is why they may have high B12 levels, and that does not have any clinical significance. Now low levels are early signs, a sign of deficiency, and may be found before the cellular changes appear in the marrow and blood. But low levels are not specific for B12. So it can be low, B12 levels can be low in 1/3 of the patients with severe folate deficiency also. Now as far as the serum folate, I see a lot of patients, basically I don't believe in this test because again it is, it's a very labile level, folate level. It may be low without significant tissue deficiency. So what we actually need to measure is the RBC folate, which is not commonly available test. But we can go wrong with even the RBC folate. This definitely correlates better, not very widely available, and it's again may not be specific. So folate deficiency is something that we see B12 and we see folate and we treat with folic acid. Now other tests that we can do in such scenario is serum homocysteine, serum methylmalonic acid, urinary excretion of MMA and formimoglutamate, vitamin D, B12 absorption. These we don't do Schilling's test and all, or the deoxyuridine test that was used to be done earlier. What we use sometimes in our patients is, and highlighting this, homocysteine and methylmalonic acid both are elevated in B12 deficiency, but homocysteine is only elevated in patients with folate deficiency. Now patients who have pernicious anemia, we have patients who have familial pernicious anemia. So these people have either antibodies to intrinsic factor or antibodies to parietal cell. So basically, or there are patients with achlorohydria. So these people will never absorb B12 because there is a, so if somebody is not improving on B12 and you actually think it's a B12, then we can order these tests, antibodies to the intrinsic factor and parietal cell. Now coming to the other category where the MCV is normal between 80 and 100. This is the most common cause is anemia of chronic disease. Now early iron deficiency, which I just mentioned a few slides back, can also cause normocytic normochromic anemia. It's mainly normocytic but hypochromic in such situations, and patients, hazard of ICU patients when they over investigated, again anemia may be of normocytic type. And of course patients who have combined B12 and iron deficiency or folate and iron deficiency, they may also have a normocytic. Anemia of chronic disease is common. It is basically there because there is impaired utilization of iron despite abundant iron store. So if we do the bone marrow, there will be enough iron. If we see the ferritin, there will be enough ferritin. But yet iron levels are low and they are not utilizing that iron. So basically what is happening is the macrophages, when the cell, the RBCs undergo their normal lifespan and the red blood cells are dying, then the iron is released from the red blood cells, or the red blood cells are engulfed by the macrophages. So the iron is released into the macrophages, and from there it has to be released out to bind to transferrin in the blood, which is the one which will carry it to all the tissues. Now here that macrophages do not release the iron from them, so the iron doesn't go into the blood to be carried to the tissues. So that's why the ferritin will be high, serum iron will be low, and because of these, this is all happening because of these cytokines. So these cytokines are, or underproduction of erythropoietin will prevent the iron from being released from the macrophages. So that is the basic pathophysiology, and the hallmark, as I said, is normocytic normochromic anemia with a normal or low retic, low TIBC, low iron with increased ferritin and increased marrow iron stores. So how do we differentiate anemia of chronic disease from early iron deficiency? The chronic disease, we should typically expect a normochromic normocytic. In early iron deficiency, we may get normocytic, but there is usually hypochromia which is there. They are not normochromic. Now, in chronic disease, iron ferritin is high, but in iron deficiency, ferritin would be low. Iron will be low in both the cases. So if we look at only iron, we may not be able to pick it up. If we only look at the RBC indices, we may miss it. So we need to carry out the whole profile. Of course, everybody doesn't require a marrow iron, but short of it, we should do iron, TIBC and ferritin should be integrated into all iron deficiency anemia work. So I hope that is clear. Of course, as I mentioned, then they can be, if there are dimorphic anemias, combination of different substrate deficiencies, then it is going to be a different picture. as we see folate and iron deficiency in pregnancy and alcoholism, because alcoholics may bleed and they may have iron and they may have B12 deficiency or folate deficiency because of diet insufficiencies. Then patients with B12 and iron sufficiency, and mind you, these combinations occur in practice, and that's where these anemias could be possibly complicated or not responding, because there's some element which is not picked, not treated, and they are inadequately treated and inadequately responding. Now, what is the role of erythropoietin? Do we do erythropoietin in all patients? No. Very limited role of erythropoietin levels. 1/3 of the patients of myelodysplastic syndrome will benefit with mega doses of erythropoietin, which is doses which are huge, not heard of, usually 40,000 international units per week. So that's a huge mega dose, and this is only helpful if the erythropoietin levels are less than 500 and particularly less than 200 according to studies. So these are the patients who may respond to this and may not require transfusions if you put them on erythropoietin. Barring this, very little role of erythropoietin, because all patients of CRF are known to have low erythropoietin. We don't need to check the levels and they'll be put on erythropoietin anyways. Now, another setting where they require erythropoietin levels is in patients of polycythemia, but we find that it always does not correlate. So it's not like a sine qua non, but in a given setting we take it along with other investigations to aid in diagnosis. Now the next important thing is, besides, I stress that there is a CBC we need to order, not just hemoglobin. We need to look at the red blood cell indices, but we look at the peripheral smear because we will find all the complete information there. But another test which is not offered and not interpreted correctly is reticulocyte count. So whenever the bone marrow is always responding to anemia with, if suppose all the substrates are present and iron is there and B12 is there, it typically, if the bone marrow is functioning normally, it should respond to anemia with a high retic count. Now suppose a retic count is not elevated and we need to correct the retic count to the degree of anemia. So just having a retic is not enough. So we need to use this formula to correct the retic. So whatever is the retic percentage that is reported from the lab, some labs even give a corrected retic, otherwise we can always calculate it ourselves. Observed percentage into observed hematocrit upon normal hematocrit for that age. And that's what will give us the absolute retic count. So anything above 2.53 corrected is high. Less than that for a degree of anemia will be normal or low. Now suppose there is an anemia and we are getting an appropriate reticulocyte response. So suppose there is a hemoglobin of 8 and I am getting a retic count which is 3% or 2.5%. And I feel there is no bleeding happening. Then it means that I have to rule out hemolysis. Bleeding is much more common than hemolysis. So any patient with anemia who has high retic, first rule out bleed. Hemolysis comes second. And when we suspect hemolysis is something that I am going to discuss with you now. Now anemia of hemolytic means there is increased destruction. So normally there is a good balance that is maintained between production of red blood cells and the destruction which is going on simultaneously. But in situations when there is a hemolysis going on, obviously the destruction is far more faster than the production. There is a normocytic normochromic anemia, but the red blood cell survival is shortened. And there is reticulocytosis definitely in hemolytic anemia, and that is because of increased RBC destruction and the bone marrow responding normally to it. When do you suspect hemolysis? You suspect if there is recurrent jaundice, particularly of the indirect type, and I mentioned that B12 deficiency is something which you need to first look at. There is history of cola colored urine, a patient having venous ulcers. We have these patients of hereditary spherocytosis who present with venous ulcers which are non-healing. So that is the situation. Patients who have an unexplained splenomegaly, patients who have gallstones, particularly if it is present in young males, that should be always investigated for an underlying hemolysis. Or suppose there is a fall in hemoglobin which is in relation to a particular drug, particular infection, or related to transfusion. We must definitely think an acute fall like this is hemolysis. Bottom line is, if suppose a patient has a hemoglobin which is normal one day and we suddenly feel there is we see that the hemoglobin has fallen down, there can be only two differential diagnoses. One is bleeding, and 90% of the cases is bleeding. or 95% of the cases it's bleeding. It's 5% it would be hemolysis. There can be only two kind of causes for that, bleeding or hemolysis with a sudden fall in hemoglobin. Now what are the tests? We use reticulocyte count combined with serial hemoglobin. So if there is a hemoglobin which is serially falling and retic count is elevated, or you getting some of those features I mentioned. If the serum haptoglobin is low, which is an indicator of intravascular hemolysis, suppose we are finding that there is hemosiderin in the urine, the iron is deposited in the renal tubules, and so if the urine is smear is made and we check it, we'll find iron deposits there. And suppose we find unconjugated hyperbilirubinemia, raised LDH or hemoglobinuria, all these are tests which are determining. And these are some of the features like retic count, unconjugated LDH, haptoglobin which is decreased, urine hemoglobin presence, hemosiderin present. These are the tests, none of them is definite, but yes, they are all indicators. But if we look at the peripheral smear, we may not find anything. What we are going to see most of the times in hemolysis is that there will be a response from the bone marrow in the form of reticulocytosis and polychromatophils, or there may be a shift to left. So recently I had a patient who was referred to me from another hospital as probable acute leukemia. Now what we see was that he presented with a low hemoglobin, he was given blood transfusions, he developed a transfusion associated hemolysis, and his TLC, which was 9,000, rose to 40,000. And we started seeing all immature fractions in the blood, which was perceived by somebody as a leukemia, and of course there was a whole panic among the family, and they were brought in, and when we saw that, we found that this was all hemolysis and the TLC had risen because of acute hemolysis and bone marrow response. So we had started seeing a leukemoid reaction and a shift to left, and it was not leukemia. We sort of transfused him more blood, and the transfusion went safely, and the patient is now completely out of it. We didn't even need to go and do a bone marrow because it was not required. So in hemolysis, a patient who has anemia with a high retic count, it virtually means more marrow will not be required, because we know bone marrow is responding very well. And of course we can look for other things and telltale signs like spherocytosis, cystocytes, bite cells, and particularly G6PD deficiency, sickle cells, acanthocytes, autoagglutination in autoimmune hemolytic anemia, or poikilocytosis. So these can be evidences, but be prepared not to get anything on the peripherals. But we must look for it. What are the other tests we can do is hemoglobin electrophoresis, hemoglobin A2, G6PD. PK is not usually commercially available. The direct antiglobulin test DCT, cold agglutinins, osmotic fragility in spherocytosis. In PNH, what we do is acid hemolysis or flow cytometry for CD55 and CD59 and flare. And then if in a clinical situation we are looking at a DIC, then we do the coagulation profile. Now Coombs positive hemolysis does happen. It's not such a common occurrence, I'm sorry for that. It has important therapeutic implications, because in such patients we avoid blood transfusions, because any transfusion can actually trigger a hemolysis and they can actually get worse than what they were. So it could be a warm antibody or a cold antibody type of autoimmune hemolysis. Then Coombs negative has a differential of TTP, HUS and DIC. I'm not going into those details. And again, in a Coombs negative, if you are suspecting hemolysis, you should think of a rare entity called PNH, but I think that we can leave it for me. To summarize, whenever we have a case of anemia, please just don't leave at hemoglobin. I will repeat, look at associated WBC and platelet abnormalities, check the retic count, look at the RBC indices and the morphology, and there is definite role of doing liver function tests, kidney function tests, and serum LDH in particular. Now bone marrow, as we all know, is the spongy tissue in the and mainly now it is there only in the pelvis or the sternum in the adults. In isolated anemias, particularly if there's a high retic response, bone marrow is not required. A patient with iron deficiency anemia, we actually do not require a bone marrow. So we have limited indications in isolated anemia where we go. Suppose we are not getting a retic response. If the retic is low, then you start thinking, is it a pure red cell aplasia? Are there associated fall in WBC platelets? Is this aplastic? Is this MDS? So that's where we need to look at the other anomalies and then see. It's a low risk OPD procedure. We don't admit patients for bone marrows. They come in, we do it under local anesthesia, and the patients go back, and patients go and jog and do whatever they feel up to it. But it is definitely a little uncomfortable, I would call it. It's slightly uncomfortable, and we do it only if it is indicated. And of course, indications where we suspect megaloblastic, MDS, again megaloblastic, the tests are sophisticated, we look at the smear properly, we don't need to. Though megaloblastic per se is a diagnosis on marrow, but we diagnose so many patients and it's so prevalent in India, then I think we have stopped even thinking about bone marrows there. Just treat them, they respond well, we don't need to do a marrow. So beyond that, we need to do if we suspecting myelodysplastic, multiple myeloma, sideroblastic, pure red cell aplasia, cytopenias are there associated with hemoglobin, we need to definitely do a bone marrow. If the counts are high, low, associated with anemia, we intervene. Aplastic leukemias or lymphomas. So till now I've just concentrated on the basic things like iron deficiency, B12, of hemolysis. But now I want to just tell you that all may not be iron deficiency, all may not be B12 deficiency, all may not be hemolysis. Okay. Anemia is a cardinal manifestation of any hematological disorder, including hematological malignancies and even other malignancies. So do not sort of just think it's anemia, it could be more than that. And I just want to highlight with some of the cases which are from my practice. Now the first lady is a middle-aged lady. She came in with a discomfort in the left inguinal region and she had fatigue, which was kind of speaking that she had anemia. There was pallor. So this is very concise. Basically she had fatigue that was running in, and then she noticed that she had discomfort in the left inguinal region. Now when she came to us, we found there was pallor and there was a left inguinal node which was fixed, measuring about 4 by 5 centimeters. When we did a hemoglobin, it was 10 grams. ESR was high, it was a normocytic normochromic anemia. On the peripheral smear, we found that the lymphocytes were slightly elevated, not too much, just a marginal elevation, but some of them looked atypical. The LDH was mildly increased. So we asked her to go in for an excisional lymph node biopsy, and there we picked up a non-Hodgkin's lymphoma of follicular type, grade 3A. And then now she's going to go on treatment. She's a case I saw last week. I am not touching on therapeutics today. I'm just discussing on our clinical approach because I think it would be out of a scope of a single talk. Second case, a 23-year-old IT professional who was admitted to me today in the OPD. He basically had fever for 1 week and he had extreme fatigue. Now, surprising, the guy was so busy that he did not notice, but he presented with pallor, and it was only retrospective that the physician who referred to me today noticed that the hepatosplenomegaly was there. Now, this physician told me that my father had CLL. So I am very aversive. Any patient who has fever for 1 week, I definitely get a CBC done. And I said, very rightly so. That should be the policy. So she did a CBC. And once the CBC came, she noticed that patient has a huge hepatosplenomegaly, which patient has not reported with symptoms of. Now HB was 10.4 and TLC was 3,37,800. This is today's case, and we've seen a shift to left with all presence of all these immature cells. So what is the diagnosis? No, this is chronic myeloid leukemia. So this is what we think, and we'll be running through because there is a huge splenomegaly.
Does it occur in middle age?
It does, but mind you, this is this is not, we see so many cases. Now this is a thing that we all talk about, that why do we see people with myelomas, lymphomas and CLL so early in life, but we are seeing a lot of patients who are in their 20s, 30s, 40s. I have several patients who are like that. And that is why I presented this patient today. Sorry?
Overtime कर रहे हैं.
Over diagnose कर रहे हैं. Overtime कर रहे हैं.
जल्दी पूरे हो रहे हैं.
हाँ जल्दी नहीं, actually because some of the people, the statisticians feel is that we have, because of our sheer demographics, because we have a huge population in the 18 to 40 age group, which the Westerners don't have. So it's probably that's why we are feeling, but I think it's more than that. We are seeing every disease, every malignancy in much younger age group. So this is absolutely something when in our meetings, if there's an international speaker, you tell him this, he won't believe it. But this is a case from the OPD today. And this is not it. I'll present some more. So a diagnosis of chronic myeloid leukemia in this case. Now, case number 3. This was a 59-year-old diabetic and hypertensive lady, and she reported to her diabetologist with bluish discoloration of 2 fingertips of one hand. Now, I think it was the left hand, I'm not too sure. This was a case I saw last year. Now, on examination, she was found to have some splenomegaly and there was pallor. When we asked her leading questions, she said, I was fatigued, I had some weight loss, and we asked her, after seeing her reports, we said, do you have previous reports? I want to look at previous reports. To my surprise, for a long time, she had been having a high TLC and platelets. Platelets were 15 lakhs when she came in. TLC was about 20,000, 25,000, somewhere in between, I don't remember now. And when we saw the smear properly, we saw hemoglobin was 9.2 and there was anisopoikilosis with teardrop cells. We immediately proceeded to do a bone marrow in this, and this was finally diagnosed as myelofibrosis. And for this, she underwent an arterial Doppler. Obviously, arterial Doppler was done for the major arteries and all, everything was normal. So this was in the peripheral circulation, and then she had to be put on low molecular weight heparin and aspirin. She was already on aspirin and she developed this. And then she gradually responded and the fingers could be saved. So something which was there for last 1 year but was not picked up, so high should not be ignored. This is the message from here. Now this is case number 4, a 73-year-old male. He was admitted with anemia, and that anemia was normocytic normochromic anemia. It was severe and the TLC and platelets were normal. He complained of bone pains. He was a chronic smoker. A chest x-ray and a CT chest was done, which was normal. And then because this anemia could not be explained and it was associated with bone pains, we proceeded to do a bone marrow, and to our surprise, this was a metastatic adenocarcinoma. And then he had no symptoms, but a prostate was done because this was a male patient and it was markedly raised, and then we did a prostatic biopsy, and this was a metastatic carcinoma prostate picked up on a bone marrow biopsy. Just presented with anemia. This was another gentleman, 58-year-old businessman, non-diabetic normotensive, presented with fatigue and weight loss. He had bone pains in the past, but he was ignoring. So his fatigue and weight loss and bone pains was spanning probably about 3 to 4 months. And then one day he had some trivial trauma, he presented with pain, he was found to have a fracture of the rib. When he came in, we saw there was pallor, hemoglobin was 8, again normocytic normochromic, ESR of 120. On the peripheral smear, we saw marked rouleaux. All the RBCs were clumping on each other, like, one on top of each other like blocks. We found creatinine was up, calcium was raised. We did a serum protein electrophoresis. There was a monoclonal protein measuring 3.37 grams. We did some imaging including X-rays, MRI, osteopenia, vertebral collapse, multiple lytic lesions. And this patient, the history later when we got was that the wife felt that this guy had shrunken in his height. So what was happening was there were vertebral collapses that were happening, but that all went unnoticed unless he actually had a trivial trauma and that pain got him to the hospital. Because the anemia is happening so gradually that people don't notice it. So bone marrow was done, showed plasmacytosis, diagnosis of multiple myeloma, presenting with anemia. Again, this was another engineering student, 20-year-old, presented with fatigue, which he was ignoring, and a few days time, he had gum bleeds. There was pallor and there was petechiae, and we found pancytopenia on the CBC, but the retic was low. So again we proceeded with bone marrow, and he was diagnosed as aplastic anemia. He presented with a platelet count of less than 10. This patient is doing very well now. We wanted to do a bone marrow transplant on him, but he did not have a match. So we proceeded with immunosuppressive therapy like ATG and cyclosporin. He responded very well. He's in complete remission and he joined back his course. Most often but not, we do not find it. In this case, again, there was no cause. Sometimes we find some Ayurvedic drugs which loosely people are taking, and that is very disheartening. I had one patient of aplastic who was taking some fairness because she had vitiligo, she had vitiligo, so she was taking some alternative medicine, and she landed up with a bone marrow aplasia. So sometimes with these unknown therapies, I'm like, not my subject. This was again a recent patient, a 80-year-old politician, presented with fatigue and weakness. So 80-year-old politician will only go to a cardiologist. So went to a cardiologist. Evaluation, he had some heart block, was put on a pacemaker, but essentially nothing to explain why he was having fatigue and weakness. Now CBC was done, there was some mild, this was 2013 and I recently saw him. So his hemoglobin and TLC was marginally low, sometimes platelets were low. So basically two cell lines predominantly, I would say, hemoglobin and TLC, and that was worsening. And then finally this patient was sent over and we saw that his absolute neutrophil count was only 800 when we saw him the other day. And there was macrocytosis on the CD. B12 was alright, he had received a lot of injectable B12, lot of oral iron, anemia, just pumped up, politician is very busy. And ultrasound, no organomegaly, no evidence of chronic liver disease. Any patient who has pancytopenia, we should look at the ultrasound and do if there is any splenomegaly. Because if there may be patients of chronic liver disease who have splenomegaly and they may be just having hypersplenism and destroying. So we did the bone marrow studies, including chromosome studies and fish studies, and we finally made a diagnosis of myelodysplastic syndrome. Another lady treated last month, 49-year-old lady. This is very interesting. Now she presented with fever and severe anemia to another peripheral hospital. She was found to have lymphocytosis and thrombocytopenia. So she was given, in view of severe anemia, she was given a blood transfusion. And maybe along with that she received a small dose of hydrocortisone. Now very loosely given. What happened was, she was a case of acute lymphoblastic leukemia and the TLC at that time was about 50,000. With that small dose of hydrocortisone, she developed a tumor lysis syndrome. So she presented to us later. We of course made a diagnosis of ALL. She presented with acute uric acid nephropathy and fluid overload bleeding as a result of tumor lysis. Uric acid was 23 milligrams. And she had to be taken up for dialysis. We used something called as rasburicase to alter, just stop the uric acid production, and managed to get out this lady out of and started her on induction chemotherapy. She's now in complete remission, going for consolidation. So management is specific to each case, but there are some take-home messages which I want you to know. So just stop looking at just the hemoglobin reports. Always order CBC, ask for a smear finding and look at something which is abnormal. Isolated anemias, look at RBC indices and retic count to take the next decision. Don't ignore any abnormal TLC and differentials and platelets in a setting of anemia, with high SR with a particularly relevant clinical history. History is very paramount. Iron deficiency anemia is not a diagnosis on its own. It's always secondary to something. So it should not be left there. Iron deficiency treated. You should find out why she developed iron deficiency, why this gentleman had iron deficiency. Always look for an underlying cause. We've had patients, we picked up CA colons, we picked up gastric carcinomas, esophageal carcinomas just because they presented on iron deficiency and we are aggressive. So rule out occult bleed. Every patient, unless it's a lady with menorrhagia, pregnant woman where you can account for the iron deficiency, look for occult bleeds, do an endoscopy, colonoscopy with an unexplained anemia. And the bottom line is, if any patient with whatever treatment that you are doing, to the best of your judgment, it does not respond with a rise in hemoglobin, please reconsider your diagnosis and say something else is wrong. We need to do more than that. I thank you for your patient listening.
That was a very exhaustive talk on evaluation of anemia by Dr. Srikanth. I think that increased the knowledge of all of us sitting here. I think she needs a second round of applause.
Okay. So Dr. Mitu, that was such an excellent talk on anemia, such a common subject. You talked about anemia based on RBC indices, the macro, the normal and the macros. This is so true. Friends, but Dr. Mitu, a lot of interest has been generated on cytokines. So production of EPO and its release, especially in ACD or now called as AI, anemia of inflammation. What do you talk about that?
Yeah, I did mention that the cytokines, including interleukins and tumor necrosis factor in various settings are very important, and they basically depress the production of erythropoietin and prevent the release of iron from
Right.
macrophages,
Yes.
which accounts for the anemia. So you have somebody who has normocytic pneumochromic anemia with low iron, low retic and high ferritins. So that's the way they typically present because of the cytokines leading to suppression of iron utilization.
So, in rheumatoid arthritis, when we give infliximab, it
It
depresses
brings down
the
TNF
TNF
yeah.
alpha, the gamma interferon, the IL-6 and 12, and the hemoglobin rises.
Absolutely.
So that's so
So
true.
if you basically address the major the cause of inflammation, then since it's because of chronic inflammation, the inflammatory markers come down, the cytokines come down, the anemia improves. So
Ma'am.
as the disease is treated, they will respond anyway.
So if there is iron deficiency, you said there would be high RDW, red cell.
Yes, yes.
With,
High value.
so many times we see the RDW is high. So is it always because of iron deficiency?
No, it may even be because of B12 folate deficiency.
B12 and
Any-
folate deficiency.
Any deficiency state will lead to increased RDW.
Ma'am, tell us how much total blood volume loss should be there for the patient to become hemodynamic unstable?
So that depends on how soon it happens. Suppose it's a blood loss which is happening over a period of time, then one tolerates well. But if suddenly if you lose about 500 ml also,
So
that
30 to 40%.
Yes.
Ma'am, you also talked about that the MCV is more than 110 is the folate or the vitamin B12 deficiency. Macrocytosis of alcoholism, can you just repeat that?
Yeah, I mentioned that usually it is between 100 and 110 in other causes. And when it's B12 folate, you see it to be going more than 110 also. It's not a rule, but usually this is the thing, that above 110, most of the time it is not just alcoholism or other causes, it is associated with B12 and folate.
Okay, ma'am, the final question. In anemia, which is the best iron salt to be given?
There's nothing like that. I think most of them people do well. Its importance is the compliance. Because patients do not comply with iron. The iron is not the faulty thing.
Isn't it the ferrous sulfate is not so well absorbed as compared to the ferrous ascorbate?
Well, I think I have seen patients and we've all been to government institutions where everywhere
They have been
everybody
writing.
was getting ferrous
Yes,
sulfate.
yes.
It has 60 milligram of elemental iron. So compared to if you see many other preparations, they may have 115 milligrams of total iron, elemental iron. So you need to give it more often.
Okay,
So that compliance doesn't happen. But barring that, ferrous sulfate also gives very good response.
right.
Ma'am, I just wanted to ask you about serum protoporphyrin levels.
Yeah, that
Is
is.
it still experimental or is it being used nowadays?
No, we don't typically use, again, this test is not commonly used because we have these tests and then transference receptors. But these tests we are able to most of the times reach a diagnosis. We are not using protoporphyrin.
More of an experimental kind of a thing?
I would still say it has not reached the commercial values and I think we don't really need it so much.
Please take the mic.
Yeah, we, see, I use, that's basically what is called as darbepoetin, which is it's a longer acting form of erythropoietin. So we use these patients, use this, the doses are different in patients with CRF and when we use it in our patients, particularly with multiple myeloma or myelodysplastic syndrome. So what the nephrologists are using is a 40 milligram subcutaneous dose and what we use is up to 200 milligrams of erythropoietin, the darbepoetin. So the experience is equally good so far. Yeah.
Ma'am, regarding iron studies, most of the time we find that the syringes, etc. are not really iron filled. How do you ensure that these are done, and
See, the iron typically, now all the samples are collected by vacuum so the blood directly goes from the needle into the containers. So the tubes which are used for iron collection are supposed to be iron free. Right.
how do you ensure all that, because initially in the 80s and 90s, they used to keep these glass vessels and all this
Yeah, I know.
Particular kind of procedure and all that, you know.
It's interesting.
There was a lot of contamination because of iron present already in
Yeah.
this kind of container.
I know way back till 2006, I could actually monitor. I was in Bombay and in KM hospital, and we used to have these treated tubes which we used to. Now we are with these commercial labs. I don't think I'm keeping a tab on it. I believe they have iron-free tubes.
My questions are, number one, say homocysteine levels we are using. So this indicates one is deficiency of folate. Second, we use it as a cardiac marker. So how do we differentiate between the two?
See, because homocysteine is associated with increased risk of thrombosis. And that is why homocysteine is part of the thrombophilia workup in patients who have coronary or cerebrovascular events in a younger age group, where you do not expect that it is related to coronary artery disease or ischemic heart disease or ischemic changes. Now, we've also found that most of our patients who presented with cerebral venous thrombosis, one common risk factor that we found was homocysteine. Now that's besides the fact. Of course, homocysteine is most often but not secondary to in our Indian setting as a result of B12 and folate deficiency. So most of these people, when in our experience we have put them on B12 folate, their homocysteine levels come down.
How do we
So
differentiate?
primary homocystinemia is per se what we are noticing is less common in India. Most of it is secondary to B12 folate deficiency.
So I want to know the exact interpretation between ferritin and the transferrin.
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 Okay, I mentioned, I did not mention transferrin receptors in my talk. I mentioned about iron and TIBC and ferritin. Now, you can tell me if you want me to talk on transferrin receptors. Now, iron is, you want to know about iron and total binding capacity?
Okay. Iron profiles,
Haan ji.
when we ask them, so they give us iron level,
Haan ji.
TIBC and transferrin.
Transferrin saturation.
Yeah.
Now, transferrin
And
saturation.
what about ferritin levels and how to differentiate between ferritin and transferrin?
Okay.
Transferrin saturation.
Okay, so it's basically you measure the serum iron and you measure the TIBC, and basically transferrin saturation is their ratio. Okay, so what we normally expect is that the transferrin saturation is between 15 to 30%. So in iron deficiency, we expect iron to go down, iron binding capacity to increase, and transferrin saturation to go down. And so do we expect the ferritin to go down, which is reflective of the iron stores. Now, transferrin saturation and ferritin both are low. It reflects iron deficiency.
As I gathered from your talk, so testing B12 only doesn't matter much. It doesn't give the whole picture because it can be masked by B12 deficiency, B folate deficiency, and other factors also.
Right.
And the blood picture also, it's not okay. If it is normocytic normochromate, it may be still having a combination of iron deficiency and B12 deficiency
Yeah.
to be a normocytic.
Yeah.
Iron deficiency brings the size of cells low
Low.
and B12 makes it high. So if it is a dimorphic situation type, like say worm infestation, so will it be confusing?
No, I think that's why I told you a peripheral blood smear is very important. In all these patients where there are deficiencies of iron or B12 or folate, you expect a high RDW, and on the peripheral smear you will see a dimorphic picture, and you historically you may feel this is a pure vegetarian, not eating enough of B12 because all the sources are animal sources, and also there is some blood loss or something to account for iron deficiency or inadequate iron intake, that you would start thinking of a combination. So let's not just be confined with these B12 levels only. We should look at it clinically, and giving a trial of B12 will not harm the patient at all.
My last question, in the case of CA prostate, it was mentioned osteopenia and it was also mentioned the size had shrunken. So would it be osteopenia or osteoporosis?
No, I mentioned in the case of multiple myeloma, the osteopenia and the vertebral collapse as well as the lytic lesions. So it was not in regarding with the prostate, but in that case of prostate also we saw PET CT showing multiple osteoblastic lesions. So that's what is. What are you saying, osteopenia versus osteoporosis? Yeah, well, osteopenia, you are right, is a main thing on DEXA scan. So what I meant was that the bones looked osteoporotic. So that is the right
Dr.
term.
HP Singh, please.
Madam, thank you very much for your excellent presentation.
Thank you, sir.
I have attended so many workshops on anemia. We have discussed all the causes of anemia, but you always left one of the important causes of the anemia. That is sports anemia. Just I want to know what is sports anemia, what are the causes, what is the management.
So basically, if there are sportsmen and they may be nutritionally deficient, or sometimes what you can have is a march. Huh?
No, madam.
Okay, so then let's hear from.
What is it? Please specify.
I was talking about March hemoglobinuria. That is something which comes to soldiers and to sportsmen.
The athletes who are involved in long distance running.
Marathon running.
Like steeplechase, 5,000, 10,000, half marathon and full marathon running, and army people, paramedical forces, those who are doing actually daily for 20 kilometers running, maybe more, having disintegration of the RBC due to running the feet, having anemia, that is called sports anemia, number one. Number two, the cause I have already discussed, but management. If you see the picture of the thalassemia or sports persons, that is the disintegration of the RBCs and NS, normal and normal chronic anemia. Only treatment is nothing. The treatment is remove the cause. Here we cannot remove the cause because nobody can stop the running or activities.
Right. So we had this girl, a young girl who came with something like this, and she had anemia along with thrombocytosis and a very high CPK. And when we went into history, it was basically that she had run that marathon and she was having this anemia and thrombocytosis as a result.
Go ahead. Then a patient with a picture of yellow microcytic anemia. How do you decide whether it's folic acid deficiency or B12? Is it by the levels or otherwise?
Yeah, as I said, B12 is more common among the vegetarians, and folate, I guess in India, I think all of us are folate deficient, because we as such do not eat raw vegetables and fruits so much as the Westerners do. So we are always folate deficient, we overcook and we pressure cook everything. So I guess we, as a sine qua non, if a patient has a B12 deficiency and you replace folate early, then they can have marked neurological involvement, right? So we, as a rule, initiate both the things together, and whenever it's a B12, we almost sort of give folic acid along with it and make sure it's replaced.
We give both simultaneously.
Yeah, we give both simultaneously because B12, if they present with such clinically significant as to cause pancytopenia, which is the most often presentation that reaches me. I'm sure you must be seeing more of anemias, but when they come to me, by the time they are pancytopenic. So in such cases, we do not wait and we initiate on injectable preparations.
Ma'am, 2-3 simple questions. One is, once we have a documented case of iron deficiency anemia, and we start treating the person, and we achieve a desired hemoglobin level, how long will you continue to supplement iron etc., despite having achieved a normal hemoglobin?
Okay, so that's a very nice question, something which I should have said, but then I'm glad you asked. The benchmark is not a normal hemoglobin. The benchmark is to find the cause, elevate the hemoglobin to normal values and correct the iron stores. So suppose there's no blood loss happening, and we are sure about that, and we've corrected the hemoglobin, we need to give iron for another 3 to 6 months to build up the iron stores. And only once the ferritin is corrected do we stop, and when we also know that there's no ongoing blood loss. Very often we see ladies who come with menorrhagia, and no matter, you cannot stop iron on them, but they're perpetually bleeding. So they will again fall down. So they need to be on some low iron replacement all throughout.
And very often we hear, and Dr. Dutsu also mentioned about it, that there is an anemia of chronic diseases. What is that anemia due to?
I mentioned in my talk, and I just now mentioned also, it's because of defective erythropoietin production and because of cytokines, inability of the body to utilize iron. And I mentioned very detailed that normally the iron is released from the red blood cells into the macrophages and then released from the macrophages and released into the circulation to bind to transferrin, and the transferrin carries it to the tissue. Now suppose this release from the macrophages is not happening, which is inhibited by cytokines. The iron is there but in the macrophages but not available for utilization.
This is
And that is the cause of anemia of
usually associated with chronic inflammatory diseases.
inflammatory diseases and renal failure, malignancies. This is the cause. That's why so many of my cases had anemia as a presentation. They had anemia of chronic disease.
Friends, last two things. I would like to felicitate Dr. Meetu, Dr. Chauhan, please.
Bouquet is there in front of man.
Yeah, to
Big hand for